At 68, Tom Hardy sat alone in a dimly lit room, the last traces of dusk settling softly against the windowpane. The world outside had quieted, but inside a different kind of silence stretched, heavy, deliberate, as if waiting for him to finally speak. A small recorder on the table clicked once, then steadied into stillness. Tom leaned forward, his hands clasped loosely, the posture of a man who had wrestled with memory long enough to know that some truths arrive only when the body grows tired. "When you reach my age," he murmured, voice low and weathered, "you stop pretending certain ghosts aren't still with you." He paused, letting the words settle in the half-light. "There are 5 names, 5 faces I've never been able to forget." It was not a dramatic confession, nor the opening line of a fabricated scandal. It sounded more like a final inventory of wounds, a quiet reckoning with the shadows that trailed behind his success. People had always imagined Tom Hardy as unbreakable, shaped from grit and fire, a man built to withstand storms. Yet here, beneath the warm flicker of a single lamp, he looked less like an icon and more like someone bracing against the weight of his own past. 5 names, 5 fractures, and a question hanging between breath and silence. Who were they? The silence that followed his confession seemed to stretch backward through time, reaching into the narrow streets of Hammersmith, where Tom Hardy's story first began. Long before the fame, long before the sharp edges of adulthood shaped him, there was only a quiet boy walking home under a sky the color of pewter, listening to the rumble of his own heartbeat. He was born into a world of contradictions, warmth and turbulence, affection and distance, where love could be fierce, but silence could be sharper still. His father's voice, rich with imagination, filled the house with stories, yet it was often overshadowed by the heavy pauses that lingered after arguments. His mother held the family together with gentle resolve, but even she could not protect him from the early fractures that form inside a child learning to mistrust the world. Tom was quick to feel the weight of expectations, quicker still to sense disappointment even when unspoken. There was a moment, small, almost forgettable, when he first learned how easily trust could be broken. A promise made to him as a boy, one he clung to, dissolved without explanation. It was nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just a quiet erasure. But it stayed, and it taught him something dangerous. To love was to risk being left behind. From that day, he carried an unspoken rule within him. Guard your heart and never forget the ones who wound you. Years later, at 68, those early shadows still followed him, whispering the names he could not forgive. Success did not arrive for Tom Hardy in a single surge. It came in waves, unpredictable, powerful, sometimes violent, pulling him forward and dragging him under in equal measure. In his 20s, London felt too small for the storms he carried inside. He drifted through auditions with a hunger that bordered on desperation, each rejection carving deeper lines into his confidence. And yet, when the door finally opened, it opened wide. Directors saw in him what he had been trying to hide his entire life, a rawness that refused to be tamed. Hollywood followed quickly. The sets grew larger, the lights brighter, the expectations heavier. Tom became the man who could transform into anything: warrior, villain, hero, monster. Cameras adored him, audiences worshipped him, and the industry learned to fear the intensity he brought into every frame. But inside, between breaths and beneath the applause, he could feel the same childhood fissures pressing outward, threatening to split him open. There were nights when he left award ceremonies early, slipping into the back of a car with the tie loosened around his neck, staring at the blur of city lights through the window. Fame, he realized, was not a warm spotlight. It was a magnifying glass held too close to the skin. In the middle of this ascent, he met people he trusted, friends, collaborators, a love that felt like an anchor in the rising tide. But success exposes as much as it elevates. One of the first betrayals of his adult life arrived quietly. No shouting, no dramatic rupture, just a slow retreat, a truth withheld, a promise broken by someone he believed would stand beside him. It left a bruise he carried into every role thereafter, a reminder that even at the top, the ground could shift suddenly under his feet. He worked harder, shined brighter, and moved faster, as though outrunning the memory. From blockbuster sets to intimate dramas, Tom's reputation grew into myth. But the faster he climbed, the more clearly he sensed the shadows waiting at each summit. By 68, looking back, he could pinpoint the exact moment when success and solitude began to intertwine, when applause became indistinguishable from warning bells. And somewhere in that ascent, the first of the five names etched itself into his memory, refusing to fade. The higher Tom climbed, the quieter the world around him became. Fame has a way of thinning the air, of turning familiar voices into distant echoes, and by the time he reached the peak of his career, he had begun to sense the chill that accompanies isolation. It was during this period when the spotlight was brightest that the deepest fracture appeared. It began with a conversation he never expected to overhear, a whisper exchange behind a half-closed door. A colleague he trusted, someone he believed would shield his vulnerabilities, had bartered them instead. Private fears turned into currency, personal confessions reshaped into stories for others to dissect. Tom stood frozen, listening as his own life was twisted into something unrecognizable. No argument followed, no confrontation, only silence, a silence that hollowed him. From that day, he learned a new truth. Betrayal does not always roar. Sometimes it moves like smoke, almost invisible until it fills the room. Projects slipped away. A relationship cracked under the weight of things unsaid. People he once leaned on began stepping back, not out of cruelty, but self-preservation. Success had made him luminous, but it had also made him exposed. And those who once felt close now treated him as if getting too near meant being burned. He began closing doors gently, one after another, until only a few remained open. Yet even those felt temporary. Every rupture left a name behind, names he carried like cold stones in his pocket, each one heavier than the last. By 68, those stones had become monuments, and among them, five stood tallest. Five names, five wounds that time refused to soften. When Tom finally spoke of them at 68, his voice carried neither anger nor triumph, only the calm of a man who has carried his darkness long enough to recognize its shape. Name one was the gentlest of the five, though its sting was sharp in its own quiet way. She was his first love, a girl with sunlight in her hair and a laugh that loosened the knots inside him. He trusted her with the parts of himself he didn't show the world, his doubts, his fears, the boyhood fragility he hid beneath his rugged exterior. But youth is fickle. Affection wavers. One afternoon, with no warning, she walked away. No reasons, no explanations. Just a short letter folded twice, left on his doorstep. It was his first true abandonment, and although he forgave her in words, the wound never closed. She taught him the fragility of promises, and her name became the first shadow on his list. Name, too, arrived not long after fame touched him. A fellow actor, talented and magnetic, someone Tom considered a brother. Their bond was forged on set, shaped by long nights, shared exhaustion, and whispered fears about a world too big for either of them to control. But success breeds rivalry, and rivalry breeds betrayal. When a major role slipped through Tom's fingers, he learned the truth. The man he trusted had quietly undermined him, whispering doubts into the right ears. The betrayal was not loud. It was strategic, calculated, cold. That name carved a deeper line across Tom's heart, a reminder that jealousy often dresses itself as friendship. Name 3 was the name he struggled the longest to speak. It belonged to a family member, a person he believed would stand beside him long after the camera stopped rolling. Their rift was not sudden. It was a slow unraveling of misunderstandings, unmet expectations, and harsh words spoken in moments of weakness. When Tom needed comfort during the lowest point of his career, he received silence instead. A silence so complete, so devastating, that it changed the geometry of his world. This wound did not bleed outward, it bled inward, shaping his solitude, hardening him. It was the betrayal that taught him love can hurt in ways even enemies cannot. Name 4 was not a single person, but a collective force. The public, the press, the shifting chorus of opinions that rose and fell with every film he made. In one particularly dark chapter, they turned on him. Accusations, distortions, Stories spun into weapons. It was a storm he weathered alone. The people who once praised his brilliance now questioned his integrity. In that chaos, Tom discovered a truth harsher than betrayal by friends. Betrayal by strangers has no face to confront, no apology to hope for. This wound taught him to fear crowds more than solitude. And then there was name 5, the one he revealed only after a long pause, as if searching for the courage to speak aloud what he had carried for decades. "The 5th name," he murmured, "is mine." He had spent years punishing himself for every misstep, every lost relationship, every silence he could not break. He blamed himself for trusting too easily, for loving too deeply, for not protecting the boy he once was. He held himself responsible for the fractures he couldn't mend and the people he couldn't keep close. In the end, the deepest wound was not inflicted by others, but by the man he saw in the mirror. Because forgiving others is difficult, but forgiving oneself is a battle fought in the quietest, darkest corners of the soul. And at 68, Tom Hardy had not yet won that battle. The room had grown dim by the time Tom Hardy finished speaking, the last of the evening light slipping across the floor like a fading memory. He leaned back, the weight of his confession settling gently over him. Not crushing, but clarifying. For the first time in years, he was not running from the shadows that shaped him. He was naming them, facing them, allowing them to breathe in the quiet around him. On the table lay a worn photograph from his youth, its edges curled, the colors softened by time. He touched it lightly, tracing the outline of the boy he once was. That boy had dreamt of greatness without knowing how much it would cost. He had wanted admiration, unaware it would come with loneliness. He had chased purpose, not realizing he would one day have to confront himself to find it. Now at 68, Tom understood something simple yet profound. The past does not vanish just because we outrun it. It walks behind us, patient, steady, waiting for the moment we are finally brave enough to turn around. He closed his eyes, letting the silence hold him. And in that silence, a final thought surfaced. Soft, unsteady, but honest. Can a man truly live without forgiveness? Or must he learn to carry the pain just long enough to remember that he once loved?